I'm Sa'id Abdul-Salaam.
Okay. So, are you Muslim?
I've been a Muslim since 1973.
What made you become a Muslim?
Well, I grew up in the area of Jim Crow, 1937. That's when it was a law to segregate, you know, coming out of slavery. Slavery wasn't, it was legal at the time, but after slavery, separation became legal. Coming from Johnston County, where I grew up in Selma and Smithfield, African Americans were very much oppressed. Living in Jim Crow, everything was separated. If you go to a restaurant, you couldn't go and order anything from the front, you had to go to the back door. If you wanted to go to the drugstore to get a soda or something like that, you couldn't go in the front door. You had to go in the back door. You had to ride in the back of the bus. You couldn't ride in the, and it was just a lot of oppression, and a lot of Klan people put a lot of fear into my people, which I didn't like at all. And so when I came to North Carolina Central in 1955, I still had that hatred in my heart, you know, and things were very segregated here at Central in Durham when I came here. When we went to the movie, we had to sit up way up in the balcony, like in the top of the, in the ceiling almost. And everywhere else was, you couldn't drink out of the same fountain. And it was so segregated that when basketball teams came to play Duke or Carolina, the African-American brothers couldn't stay on campus. They had to stay over here in our gym, you know? So they couldn't even stay with the rest of the team. And so that's how bad it was. And when I went to the military, which was in 1959, about 3 days after I graduated from Central, I was in Texas. And one day I was playing a pickup game of basketball with a guy, and he had this star and the crescent tattoo on his hand. I asked him, what was that? And he said, that's the Muslim sign. I never heard the word Muslim or nothing like that. And he asked me, had I heard of Malcolm X? I said, no, I hadn't heard of neither one of them. So those are two things that was, you know, had registered with me, you know, because I hadn't heard of Muslim, but then when I heard of Malcolm X, he was a person that was trying to bring identity to us, awaken us up. And his philosophy was do for self. That's, you know, pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and, well, bring identity. Many of us, we didn't know who we were, where we came from, and this kind of thing, or really who we were. But Malcolm's teachings, well, I got involved in that after I got out. Going to New York after I got out of the military, I used to see this guy on the corner talking at the Teresa Hotel, which is a big African-American hotel, but I thought he was one of the regular street corner philosophers that you see around, you know. But it was Malcolm, and he was talking the talk of freedom for our people. And so I became knowledgeable of him and what he represented, freedom for our people, to free, you know, to make us proud of ourselves and establish things for ourselves, do for self, and stand up and be a man, you know, and so forth, and take care of all the human things we're supposed to. And so I followed his teachings for quite a while, and I joined a group called the Nation of Islam, and that was a Muslim group, but they were labeled black Muslims. The concept that they taught was a very racial concept, and it wasn't Islam per se like it's supposed to be. They taught that the white man was the devil. And we had to look at him as being the devil, you know, because the devilish things that he did. And so I joined that group but under the influence of Malcolm, and I followed Malcolm's footsteps in that movement. And when Malcolm took his trip to Mecca, went to Mecca for the Hajj in Saudi Arabia, that influenced me to make that trip. And when I made that trip, just like as Malcolm said, when he got there, he found out that other people were Muslims other than African Americans or black Muslims. But the name black Muslims came from a professor from Duke named C. Eric Lincoln. He was a history teacher at Duke University, and he's the one that gave us that name, black Muslims. And during this time in the Nation of Islam, Caucasians couldn't be part of us. They couldn't even come in. We called them temples. They weren't even called mosques at the time. And so it was really like a hate teaching that was just the opposite of Jim Crow. It was just, instead of black hatred, you had white hatred, and so that still existed until after Malcolm, in 1975, there was a new leader. Beforehand, the leader of the Nation of Islam was Elijah Muhammad, and after he died in '75, his son Warathi Muhammad took the leadership, and that's when he brought us into the knowledge of the Holy Quran and the practices of Prophet Muhammad, who lived in Saudi Arabia 1,400 years ago, who the Quran was revealed to. And so by studying that almost all night, stand up studying all night and growing, I came into the real knowledge of what Islam really was, that it was a religion for all humanity. It wasn't no race, all brothers, no matter what color or nationality or whatever we were all brothers. And so then I began to change my mind from the racial concept and follow the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad. And it was a relief in life. It was a relief in life because in the Holy Quran it taught us it teaches that Allah created us. Well, Allah is God, the creator. We understood who Allah was, the God, the creator of everything in the heavens and the earth. But in the Nation of Islam, it was taught that God was a man. His name Farad Muhammad, and that the Prophet Muhammad was Elijah Muhammad, and those were false teachings. But what I say, the terminology that I give them now, is that was symbolic Islam. It wasn't a real deal. It wasn't a real deal until Imam W.D. Muhammad came aboard and began to teach the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad. And it says in the Quran, it says, God is the creator of all. He created us as male, female, and so forth, nations and tribes, that we may know one another, not that we may despise one another. But the best of you are those who are most obedient to me. Things like that began to change my thought toward humanity. Looked at humanity from a whole nother concept. And our objective in life was to enter the paradise, Jannah. And so by your obedience to God, say Islam itself means the total submission to the will of God, to the Creator, And by being obedient to Him and following the example of Prophet Muhammad, your destiny, our destiny, will be the paradise, which is called the Jannah. And so that's what we live for, is to be the best we can in following Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, that we can reach the destiny, our destiny, which is paradise.
Have you or your family ever been discriminated against or treated differently because you're Muslim?
Not really. When we go shopping, when we go out shopping or something, my wife is a fair complexioned lady, and she has Asian look. You know, she a lot of people think she's a foreigner, think she's from Egypt or somewhere, and ask. We see people looking at us in a certain way kind of an odd sort of way, you know, like they had to take you see them cutting their eyes at you or so forth, you know, this kind of thing. But once we were in the grocery store, and a Caucasian guy came up and asked were we Muslim. See, my wife wear a headscarf, you know, anyway, and I wear my kufi, which is a prayer cap. And he came up and asked, were we Muslims? And we told him, yeah. He said, well, have we had any problems with people, you know, offending us? And we told him, no, by no means. And he said, well, he was glad, you know, that it didn't. But to me, it was letting me know that he had been around and he heard of Islamophobia, you know. He had heard of that. And so that's why he asked us that. But, let me back up a minute. When I was in the Nation of Islam, in the early years of Islam, Islamophobia existed, even among our own people. By being Muslim, we were discriminated, even more, being African American and Muslim. So we had it twice. And even from our own people, African American people, discriminated against, didn't want us to be around them. I've had experience wherein that, you know, we used to sell papers and stuff, you know, to give people let the people come into knowledge and understanding who we were. And I've had people to go, I went in the guy's yard one day and the guy told me, get out of my yard, man. I don't want your kind in here, you're in my yard, you know. And so we were discriminated. Christians discriminated against us. African Americans discriminated against Caucasians, and even the CIA, the FBI discriminated us because our objective was at the time was to establish an Islamic nation within this nation, not to destroy this nation, but to establish ourselves as a community. And one day, I was home, and a knock was on my door. And I opened the door, it was a FBI agent, just like in the movie, come and flash his badge and say, you know, he was FBI and so forth. So I let him in. And during that time, I was a martial arts instructor. I taught the brothers self-defense because we needed it, because there had been many brothers that had been shot and killed by police and so forth. And, but you know, so we were training brothers to take care of themselves because Islamophobia existed, but the terminology didn't exist at that time. So he came in and asked me a million questions and wanted to know if I belonged to an organization that was to try to overthrow America. And a whole lot of questions like that, you know. And even after then, they would call up and say, this is Agent so-and-so calling from in Florida. Do I know a brother that had a Muslim name? Do I happen to know him? That was just to let them know that they were in touch with me and that they had a file on me. And so, you know, I was an imam, you know, during that time. So that meant I had to be careful what I said from the roster. Because like, you know, like now, you see how it is now. They're ready to throw you out of the country or whatever, or throw you in jail. And there had been many brothers that I knew had gone to jail who had been arrested because they were Muslims during that time. And several of them who gotten killed. Mosque that I know had been broken in by the police and shot up the place and stuff, you know. So those are the kind of things, you know, we had to deal with, just trying to establish Islam. See, but Islam itself, I said, means peace. It don't mean violence. It's not to kill everybody, you know. As I was saying beforehand, God created his nations and tribes. We may love one another, but not despise one another. So when you find terrorists and people like that, they're out of the state of Islam. They're not, you can't call them Muslims because they're out of state. Just like if they are doing things out of the Quran, they're stealing, you know, and stealing or cheating people, even lying and so forth, you know, you're out of the state of Islam. Even fornication, adultery and so forth. you're out of the state of Islam, because those are things that, you know, are not permitted as Muslims, unless you're married, you know.
How would you define the term Islamophobia?
That's a word that was given to society, I guess, maybe by media. That means a hatred, that means like it's a hate, to hate people who practice Islam. There's dissension or hate out of ignorance, just like you have homophobia and so forth. And people don't understand. You have to accept the person as the person is, and not just say it's a hate thing. You know, it's not a hate thing. But Islamophobia is a hate out of ignorance towards Muslims. And but once people come into the knowledge of what we are, it disappears. It takes us like 9/11. In 9/11. There was a stage of Islamophobia at that particular time, but when that happened, I was an imam at the masjid, and the first people to call was from a Caucasian church downtown. Wanted to know, did we need them to stand outside to stand guard in front of our mosque so none of these narrow-minded people would, would try to offend us in that. And then after then, I was invited to the larger Caucasian churches here in Durham to talk about Islam, what it was, and read some from the Quran to some of the wealthiest churches in here. And once that they understood this, we had a relationship. I was invited then after to go to Ministerial Alliance meetings, interfaith services, and go to different churches and talk and read from the Quran, because without the knowledge, that's where it came about, because of ignorance. Ignorance existed, and they didn't have a knowledge of what it was all about. But once people began to understand what Islam was about, that kind of removed the Islamophobia at that particular time.
How do you feel about the presidential candidate Donald Trump and his negative words about?
I think he's a fool. I think the man is crazy. When I hear him talk, it sounds just like Hitler. He feels that only people that accept it is the pure Caucasian, I guess. You know, everybody had to be. That's what Hitler taught. You know, there was only one race of people. Everybody else. But in Trump's talks, that's what I hear. He's against brown people, against Mexicans, he's against Muslims, he's against people from everywhere else except Caucasians, except Caucasians, European Caucasians and so forth,
If he was elected, and since you are a Muslim, would you fear for your life living here in America still?
No, I don't fear for my life, because being Muslims, we're taught in the Quran to fear nothing but Allah, and that Allah would always protect us, and what is to be will be, and that if we are obedient to God, He will protect us and change the conditions. As it says in the Holy Quran, that Allah will not change the conditions of a people if they first change what's in their heart. And I feel as long as we are obedient and fulfilling our responsibility of what we have to do, I feel protected by God, and I don't even worry about that. Don't even worry about that.
Where's your hometown? Where are you from?
I was born in a place called Selma, North Carolina. It's north of Fayetteville, about 50 miles north of Fayetteville, a little small town, a little one-horse town in Johnston County. It was always redneck clans. Back in the day, those are some of the things that I'll probably never forget. But when I became Muslim, it changed that. I've grown up there. I saw racism at its worst. The Klan put fear in a lot of people, a lot of my people. And I've even been to see a cross that was burnt. The Klan used to ride through our town on the back of pickup trucks and so forth, you know, the good old boys, you know, with the pickup trucks, advertising Klan meetings at nights at somebody's farm and so forth. And then you go out there afterwards, the next morning, you could see the big crosses out there still smoking and so forth. And that our people were so afraid of Caucasians to an extent that going downtown, a lot of times if you see some young white boys or older white boys on the street on one side, our people were so afraid they would go on the other side instead of walking by, because it's been known that some of these guys, you pass by some of these guys, they'll be kicking you behind with the feet, you know, be kicking you behind with the feet, you know, this kind of thing, you know. And during that same time, riding on the train, I don't know, I'm going backwards now, but riding on a train, I'll never forget, my mother and I were going to Portsmouth, Virginia to visit some people, and they only had one car for African Americans, but they had other cars for Caucasian passengers. And this time was the migration of African Americans coming from the South going north, going to DC and New York. And when they got to Selma, the thing was full. And so we had to ride in the baggage car, in the baggage car, which had no windows, like cattle in there, you know. You had to sit on the suitcases and stuff, you know. And no windows, but in the air you got, the guy would open the side door. And these were locomotive engines, where they use coal. And riding down the tracks, riding down the road, you know, all that smoke and soot and stuff come back on you. When you get where you're going, you have to wipe that stuff off, you know, and this kind of thing. And so those are the kind of things that existed in my hometown when I was a boy.
Were you familiar with Muslims when you were younger, or?
No,
okay.
No, not until I was in Texas, until I was telling you about the guy I was playing basketball with. And that's the first time, and that was in 1961 or 62, something like that.
So how old were you when you became Muslim?
I was like 32 years old or something like that, like 32, 31, 32 or something like that. I think that's when it was.
So do you feel like being Muslim and watching the media that it's a different portrayal of what you really are? Oh
yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. What we see in the media, the media, most of the time, not everybody, but a lot of the media paints a negative picture of Islam, especially like now, right now with all this Trump stuff and everybody else and the terrorists and so forth. I don't even consider the terrorists as being Muslims, because I can't approve of what they do. Because according to Islam, you don't, even in the time of war, you don't kill innocent people. In fact, you don't even destroy property and so forth. And what these guys do, like I said before, they're out of the state of Islam. And, but yet, that's in the forefront all the time now. And the media itself has a tendency to thrive on negativism, about everything, negativism. So myself, I don't believe everything I read, and I don't think we should read it. And when you all get out in the world and start your career and stuff, you should always be giving the truth and bring positiveness. Because you can, I look at TV now, all the news, everything on the news is almost negative. And that's the same thing they do with Islam now, is paint negative. But then there are people that come to bring the true light, they bring light to it. And so that's what we have to do right now, as we did beforehand after 9/11, to bring more understanding to the public of what we are really about.
Okay, I think that's all. Thank you.
Okay, is that it?